Kinda. Okay, so here's the deal. We're gonna talk about Nikon's autofocus, but we're not gonna do it by me showing you a bunch of those silly tests where I like go out and go in and go down and go up. I bet it didn't do very well there. The point being, those aren't like super helpful. I think those are things that we do when we have like a day with a camera or we don't have any shoots lined up and we're like, I gotta test this now, so this is how I'll do it. It doesn't tell you much about how it performs in the real world. So rather than show you a bunch of little examples that don't really mean a ton, I'm going to tell you my experience of using the Nikon system for the last year and where things are at, all the way up from like using stuff like the Nikon ZF and the Z5 II right up to the Z8 and how it's felt for me. What's up? If you don't know me, my name is Chris Tejas. I'm a photographer and videographer based in Ontario, Canada. I mainly shoot portraits, events, and weddings. I've been shooting it with the Nikon system for quite a while now, and frankly, I have mixed feelings about the autofocus. So the question of like, is it great autofocus? Spoiler alert here. It is better than the haters say, and it is worse than the Nikon fans say. You've probably heard before people say that like right out of the box, it's not awesome compared to Sony or Canon. And I don't think that that's necessarily true. I think it's kind of relative to what you're using it for. So if you're using it for photo, I would say that right out of the box, it does a very good job. If you're using it for video, I would say there's some settings you're gonna wanna tweak or some nuances that you're gonna want to take into account when you're using the system. At this point, I'm a pretty hybrid shooter. On my personal work, I do a lot of photo stuff. For YouTube, I'm obviously shooting lots of video. And when I'm shooting for other people, I find myself doing a lot of hybrid work, shooting both photo and video, whether that's at a wedding or an event. Usually it's a combination of both. So I'm switching back and forth. One of the things I do love about the Nikon system that's not specific to the autofocus is the fact that you just have like a little switch to go from photo to video. And on something like the Z6 III, Z8, Z9, it's very, very fast to switch between those. You can actually be like taking photos, switch over, and right away start recording video in a way that allows you to capture things like, I don't know, if you're capturing the first kiss at a ceremony for a wedding, you can actually reliably get both, which is very cool. But all that to say, switching between the two and the autofocus performance between the two is a little bit more notable. On the photo side, I would say the autofocus is very good. 9 times out of 10, it's totally fine for what I'm using it for, and I'm not having a lot of issues. The number one thing I would say that the Nikon has trouble with when it comes to its autofocus is not being super confident in the thing that it is deciding to focus on. You can change some things in the menu system to help with that. Basically, like the AF sensitivity and speed, if you adjust those, you can help a little bit. The Nikon system is actually very good at recognizing people, which is great. It can recognize when there's multiple people in a scene, and it has a really nice function where all you have to do is kind of push your little joystick and it'll move on to the next person to the left or the right, depending on where you set it, and it will focus on them. If there's somebody standing next to me, it won't always know that it should just stay on me. It'll go between the two. Even if you tell it like, focus on this person, I find that not all the time, but often enough that I'm aware of it, it will pop over to the next person. That is something that's way more prominent in video, but it does still happen in photo. So it doesn't feel super confident in choosing the person and staying on that person, even if you try and adjust the settings to make it more sticky. The second biggest problem I've found is that it has trouble with side profile. So if I'm facing this way, a lot of times it won't know to stick on me and it'll move around. I don't know if it just did it there. I guess I'll find out in the edit in a minute. But it does have trouble with that. Like it just can't recognize profiles of people very well. And so if a person turns away, it'll kick to another person briefly. And then if they come back, it's usually pretty good about bouncing back to them. But that's a pain in the ass for photo and for video, but especially for video where all of a sudden, like, you know, those little movements for photos, the shifting of the autofocus is not the biggest deal in the world. You can change that really quickly and easily if you have your buttons set up to do so. But for video, it's pretty jarring. But overall, it does it quite a bit. And I actually, for some reason, I find that it does that more in photo and less in video. The next thing that I found is that overall, in its excitement to find faces, if you have face detect on, it finds faces where there aren't any. Not all the time, but I have noticed like certain things like flowers, for example, it tends to find faces in flowers, or it will find faces in random things that don't really make like a ton of sense to me. I don't really know why, but the Nikon system really likes to find faces, and sometimes it's just, that's not a face. That's I don't know. That's like a mark on the side of a building, or that's a hydrangea or something like that. In video, I would say the biggest issue that it has is that it really wants to hunt for people all the time. So a lot of times what ends up happening is I have the video set up. Let's say I'm recording a speech and there's somebody giving a speech. In the background are some people. They're not in focus necessarily, but they're just there. It will be focusing on the person who's giving the speech, and then it will just pop to those people for no apparent reason. And then I'll have to tell it to go back. And it'll go back for a couple seconds to that person, and then it will go back to the people behind. And it'll constantly shift between which subject it wants to go to. And it does this a lot. It is helped for sure by making it, more sticky, by like changing the sensitivity so that it is like less sensitive, meaning that basically it's not going to move as much, and that helps. So anyone who's out there who uses Nikon and they found that doesn't happen for them much, that's great. Or if you're yelling at your screen right now, I get it. There's ways to shift it. The point is that out of the box, it's just not going to be as confident, and you are going to need to make some of those changes in order for you to find it really helpful. The next thing is movement. Now there's a couple different types of movement. There's movement of the subject. So like for me, if I walk up here and I get nice and close, and then if I go back and I'm further back like this, if I kind of move to the side, if I'm like, actually like talking and moving around and stuff like this, I find that it does a decent job. It's not like terrible at all. It does a pretty good job of following. I have it set up so that it actually purposefully is a little bit slower with that stuff, because a lot of times I'm trying to make more like, I don't know, cinematic footage or something like that. I don't want those to be as apparent. But if I'm doing a vlog like this, then I in theory should probably set it up so that it's like really, really snappy, so that it'll follow me really quickly and it doesn't like slowly move to that. But I kind of like the look of that slower transition, and I think it's looking pretty good from what I can see on my Ninja up there. I will say that the other type of movement, the camera movement, where the camera's moving back and forth, it does a decent job on static subjects. So you have like subject movement and then you have camera movement. It does a pretty good job with both of those things. It's when both things are happening at the same time that it really struggles. So like if I'm moving forward and backwards as the subject, and then you have a person who's like hand holding and they're moving a bit, like let's say I'm moving in at the same time that you as the camera operator are moving this way or that way, and you're kind of pushing forward a little bit or pulling back. Those are complicated things. And the thing is, like, that's a very complicated movement for a autofocus system to be able to handle really, really well. And Nikon is just not as confident as like Sony or Canon is in those scenarios. I think with like, especially with Sony, I've found is that Sony in that specific scenario, so like camera operator moving and subject moving, Sony does a really, really good job of that. Of course, you could always just manual focus, which is actually very good on this system. I like the manual focus setup on the Nikon Z system, probably the best of all the ones I've used. So that kind of has that going for it. But this is about autofocus, not manual focus. So there are a few things you can do to improve your autofocus system. I would say largely diving into the menus and seeing exactly what it is that you are trying to accomplish and what parts of the autofocus system need to be changed. So looking at your AF speed and sensitivity is going to be really, really important. And then looking at what type of autofocus mode you're using. So are you going to be on the wide all? That's probably going to be the best catch-all for general stuff. But as soon as you're in that mode, if somebody comes into the side frame or something like that, it's going to probably want to pop to them a little bit more easily. One of the things I tend to do is I will set up custom boxes. So you can actually set up certain size boxes around your frame with the Nikon system, which is amazing. So if I'm doing like people walking down the aisle for a processional at a wedding, I'll set up a box that's like the size of the aisle. So then it'll ignore everything outside of that aisle and it'll only focus on the people in that aisle. And I actually find that using that system to be like the most reliable of almost any autofocus system. So having custom sized boxes is such a game changer, and I would say is the biggest thing that it has going for it. I know there's other systems that do that too, and that's great. You're really gonna wanna utilize that. I would say making sure, like, unlike some other systems, autofocus continuous, like AFC is kind of what you wanna use. With Nikon, you wanna be on AF, so autofocus full. That is like the single biggest thing. If you're having a ton of issues with your autofocus in video, you're almost definitely in AFC. Check out AF full, and that's going to solve a ton of problems. On the photo side, I would say the biggest thing is like setting up your custom buttons in a way where you can pop between your different autofocus modes is really helpful. The way I have mine set up is that I use the like full, all auto AF kind of mode. And then I have my AF on button actually set to 3D tracking. So when I hold it down, it enables 3D tracking. And then when I press my shutter release, when I half press, it'll start tracking on whatever it's on. That to me is like the single fastest, easiest way to bump between two different modes. And in doing so, it makes this like very, very quick and pretty confident. So that I would say is like kind of the best bet from my perspective. Definitely, I would say the more time you spend getting to know the autofocus system and using the custom modes for you is going to be the best thing. So that's basically my take on the autofocus with the Nikon system. I think it is pretty good. I think it's better than the haters say. I think it's worse than the fanboys say. It's somewhere in the middle. It's definitely usable for most stuff. I don't get a lot of missed shots, but I would say there's a couple key scenarios like the ones I described where there's still some work to do. And I think we'll see some improvements over time. Thankfully, Nikon's pretty good about updating their firmware. And so I think we'll see a lot of improvements as time goes on. And as you kind of scale up from the ZF to the Z8 to the Z9, you are going to see like improvements in the autofocus performance. Just getting into that stacked sensor where you get more autofocus reliability is a good thing. So let me know in the comments below what you think. How do you like to set up your autofocus? If you want to see like a dedicated video of just my settings, let me know and we can do that. But this is kind of a general overview of my thoughts. Thank you so much, and I'll talk to you soon. Peace.